For more, we are joined by Mason Richey, Associate Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Richey, first of all, details are pretty scant on what exactly the two leaders agreed upon, but what do you think both sides are getting out of this summit, and how concerned should we be of potential deepening ties between the two sides?
Yeah, so, obviously, Putin and Kim are not going to put out a transparent joint statement that announces that they're both going to completely and utterly violate international sanctions. And in the case of Russia, international sanctions against North Korea that Russia itself agreed to at the United Nations Security Council going back to the mid-2000s and all the way up through 2017 and even after. So we don't exactly know what it is that would be on the table to be negotiated. But of course, the U.S. intelligence has speculated, presumably based on various streams of sources with a relatively high degree of probability, that Russia would receive from North Korea ammunition and perhaps even high caliber artillery in order to assist it in acquiring the necessary materiel that it needs to continue to prosecute its war in Ukraine. North Korea, on the other hand, I think at a minimum you would assume would require energy and food assistance, considering the problems that it has in those areas of its economy. And then on top of that, it looks like, especially given the meeting took place at the Cosmodrome in the Russian Far East, that there might be some military satellite technology cooperation or assistance from Russia to North Korea. And then the cherry on the cake, so to speak, from North Korea's perspective, might be some type of transfer or assistance with nuclear naval propulsion. I find that, frankly, kind of difficult to believe that Russia would give that away. But it's not impossible, I suppose. And although if it does happen, I think it would indicate that Putin must be terribly desperate to have the material that he needs for his war. Why is this a concern? This is a concern, first of all, for the people in Ukraine and for the ability of the West and other countries who support Ukraine to push back against Russia's invasion. The more material and assistance that Russia gets from abroad, the easier it's going to be for it to continue to prosecute its war. We're also concerned, of course, about North Korea developing satellite technology, because that's going to assist it in its ability to get around U.S. South Korea deterrence efforts. And thirdly, this marks in some sense another step towards a perhaps trilateral tie-up, or at least an increasing in the bilateral relations between Russia and Pyongyang that could go along with increased cooperation with China, which would make the regional security situation in East Asia much more complicated.
Professor, what you're describing involves a longer timeline, but some are arguing this meeting was a tactical move, just a sign of Putin's desperation at this point. Do you think that's the case, or is this meeting really a sign of longer-term Russian strategy?
I don't necessarily think that those things are mutually exclusive. I think, to judge what we can tell from what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, Russia is not achieving its political objectives there, which means it is strategically failing. And this is a war of attrition at this point. And traditionally we think of a war of attrition as a war of soldiers, right? Whoever runs out of soldiers first. But this seems to be a different type of war of attrition. It's a war of materiel. It's a war of military equipment. And in particular, it seems to be a war of shells and artillery. And if Russia doesn't have enough of those, or if the ones that it has, aren't of a modern nature sufficient to carry out its war aims, then certainly Putin must be concerned, or those around him must be concerned about the strategic failure that could come along with a military defeat. So in that sense, there could be desperation. But we've been thinking, analysts here in the region and probably other places as well, notably in Washington, that we've been looking at North Korea trying to diversify away from its overdependence on China. At the same time, we've seen a clear movement towards an effort at more trilateral cooperation between Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang. And that's a long-term response, perhaps, or maybe that's not the right word, a long-term way of dealing with the fact that the U.S.-ROC alliance and the U.S.-Japan alliance is increasing in strength. And of course, as we've seen, in part to deter North Korea, but also long-term to deter China in the region, the U.S. has been increasing its emphasis on trilateral cooperation with Seoul and Japan. So I think that we're in that context. So I think you can have Russia be both desperate and at the same time see a more strategic tie-up between Russia, North Korea, and China.
All right, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for your insight this morning. Mason Richey, Associate Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies.